familiar names. Thank you all for joining us. We'll get started in just a minute. And you will notice that we are recording so that we can watch this in future sessions for other people who are unable to join us. All right. Great. Looks like we got a really good group here. I see some folks are still connecting. Okay, wonderful. I think we'll go ahead and get started. Well, welcome everyone to our first Lunch and Learn series of 2026. We're going to have a conversation about preservation issues and advocacy opportunities from a focus on both a national and a state level. My name is Jenny Wolf. I'm president of Planning to Preserve, a past board president of the Florida Trust, and ongoing board member. The Florida Trust for Historic Preservation is the statewide preservation nonprofit that helps people see, experience, and save Florida's history. We preserve and share the rich architectural, historical, archaeological, and cultural heritage of Florida. While I share some housekeeping items, I'd like you to help us understand your key preservation advocacy issues and concerns. Are they state-related, local, or national-related types of issues? So feel free to drop those in the chat. This will help our speakers today and also as we plan for our statewide advocacy day in Tallahassee and in March when we go to DC with Preservation Advocacy Week. To get started, I'd like to share a few housekeeping items about our Lunch and Learn today. As you know, we will be recording the session for those who cannot attend live. It will be available on our YouTube channel to watch later. As we go through the presentations, please remain muted unless you have a question you would like to ask during the Q&A, which will be at the end. You can type in your questions into the chat anytime, and then we'll have the Q&A after all the presentations. And of course, we'll get to as many questions as we can. And after the presentation, we'll email you the slides as well as any follow-up material. Today's Lunch and Learn offers a 1-hour AIA and APA continuing education credit. AIA members, please put your name and AIA number in the chat before the presentation ends to receive attendance credit. APA members are to self-report within 24 hours to receive credit. And we'll put this in the chat now and contact Larry. His email will be in the chat if you have any other credit questions. So now I'd like you to introduce you to today's presenters and let them talk a little bit about themselves before we get started. We're going to have Rob Naylor with Preservation Action, Mark Zubili, Florida Trust Board Vice President, and Melissa Wyllie, CEO and President of the Florida Trust, of our organization. So if you would all take a moment to introduce yourselves, we'll kick it off. Should we start with Rob?
Sure. Hi, I'm Rob Naylor. I'm with Preservation Action. I've been there about 10 years. We are a national lobbying organization for historic preservation. We're based in DC, but I actually am coming to you from Cincinnati. So good to see everyone.
Great. Thank you. And Mark?
My name is Mark Jubilee. I've been a member and now board member of the trust for, I think, coming up maybe on almost 10 years. In my other life, I do political work, campaign, and advocacy and things of that sort. Or at least I've done a lot of advocacy and lobbying in the past. And since I've been with the trust, that's kind of what I've done a lot of, on behalf of the trust. I love historical places and believe in the fight to try and preserve them.
Excellent. And Melissa?
Hey, good morning. I'm Melissa Wyllie. I'm the CEO and president of the Florida Trust for Historic Preservation. And Mark, I have been doing this for 10 years. So I think you're coming up on like year 8. You're not quite there yet. You're getting there.
But you gotta keep him in place.
I know. And I'm aging both of us because it seems like it has not been that long. But
I said I deal in politics, so everything's a little exaggerated or a little. We round up.
That's why you're so good at it. Advocacy is one of the most important things that our organization does. So we're very grateful for y'all taking the time to learn about the advocacy going on at the state level and the federal level. But also, we're really excited to hear from you in terms of what you are thinking of and what is important to you. That really helps Mark and I and Rob, you too, I think, because we're hearing some national preservation stuff as well. This really helps us. So thank you all for being with us today.
Yes, and thank you again. As Melissa said, please let us know what your concerns are, and that just helps us today as well as in the future. And if we don't get to addressing your particular issue, it may be a topic for another lunch and learn. So we may reach out to you. All right, well, I'm going to turn it over to our presenters and get started with the presentation. Thank you again for attending, and I'll see you at the end.
All right. Well, I think I'm up first here, so I will go ahead and get started. Again, my name is Rob Naylor. I'm the Associate Director of Preservation Action. We are a national grassroots lobbying organization for historic preservation. So I'm going to start by kind of providing a little background on Preservation Action, what we do, um, and then kind of get more into some specific issues that we're working on and how you can help with those. Next slide. All right. Well, we were formed in 1974, so we've been around for over 50 years now. We formed in the after the passing of the National Historic Preservation Act, kind of a group of advocates from around the country decided we really needed more of a dedicated voice for preservation now that we kind of have this federal framework that exists. Our first president, Nellie Longsworth, was instrumental in passing key preservation laws like the historic tax credit, which was established in 1976. Uh, Next slide. Some of the key things we do, of course, is monitoring legislation, working to influence policy, and bringing grassroots voices into the conversation. Um, Examples of what we do every year kind of revolve around, writing testimony on appropriations bills for historic preservation, yeah, of course, lobbying, and kind of as issues come up, really trying to present it in a way that is helpful that people can take action on, and you can really encouraging people to be active adv advocates on these issues as well. Next slide. One of our key programs is our legislative update, weekly newsletter that updates you on what's happening in Washington as it relates to impacts to historic preservation and how it is that you can take action. I'll have a little more on that later, but encourage everyone to sign up for that. It's free and provides a good overview to kind of stay abreast of what's happening at the national level. Next slide. Another one of our key programs is we do a congressional candidate survey. We do this every 2 years ahead of congressional elections. So we just did our last one in 24. But it provides I would say it kind of serves multiple purposes. We're able to gauge support on historic preservation priorities. Um, from candidates, but also serves as an education tool to help educate candidates on historic preservation, as well as be able to get it out to folks like you so you can see where some of the candidates that are running for office stand on preservation issues. Next slide. And then another one of our key programs is we do a briefing every May coinciding with Preservation Month. One of the things that we kind of deal with in the lobbying and advocacy space is a lot of turnover of key staff. Um, so we're constantly in a state of kind of educating congressional staff on these issues, getting them up to speed. So it really requires kind of a constant drumbeat to be able to kind of keep that going. We work closely with the Historic Preservation Caucus, and I've been hosting that as well as on several um, activities throughout the year. Next slide. and we're right on the verge of actually our biggest event of the year, which is we host the National Historic Preservation Advocacy Week. We do this alongside our partners at the National Conference of State Historic Preservation Officers. Um, it's really the historic preservation industry's annual lobby day. So people from across the country fly in to DC to meet with their members of Congress. We host a kind of a training day first to kind of get everyone up to speed on these issues, provide all the materials that you need, and then the next day is kind of our day on Capitol Hill, going around to the various congressional House and Senate offices. It's really a great experience. We always have a great team from Florida that comes up, Melissa and others. And our next one is actually coming up. It's March 2nd to 5th. So if you guys are interested, it's open to anybody. If you've never done this before, we'd love to have you. We provide all the information that you need, and it really is a fantastic experience to kind of see how the process works from that level. So, next slide. All right, I'll get into some of our key issues here. Um, so if you were participating in Lobby Day or just kind of seeing through some of our annual advocacy activities, one of our key issues, of course, is the historic tax credit. Um, it's uh, so I mean, obviously the historic tax credit, a little bit of background, provides a 20% tax credit for the rehabilitation of historic income producing buildings. It is a permanent part of the tax code, but that still does not mean that it doesn't require constant advocacy to be able to make sure that program is existing and working effectively, and being able to strengthen that program. That's one of the things we're been working on now, and we've been working on for the last several years, is advocating for several key changes to help strengthen that program, make sure it's working as well as it can, be able to make more buildings eligible to use the historic tax credit. Some of the issues kind of we've been dealing with it more recently is, we've seen about a 20 to 25% decrease in the value of historic tax credits. Also, I don't know if some of you can recall back in 2017, there was a pretty big tax reform effort and some initial drafts of that bill, and even I believe it was the House version of the bill that passed, it eliminated the historic tax credit. Luckily, thanks to rallying support from around the country, we were able to get that back in the bill. So the historic tax credit is still part of it, but it certainly came close, and kind of really speaks to the need for this constant advocacy. Um, but one of the changes that came with it was requiring to be taken over 5 years as compared to just 1 year. So issues like that are some of the things that we're dealing with now to try to strengthen that program, um, and make it better. There is a bill in the current Congress, the Historic Tax Credit Growth and Opportunity Act. Um, See the bill numbers there. It's HR 2941 and Senate Bill 1459. That would do several things, all aimed at making improvements to improve access to the credit, make more projects eligible, as well as boost the credit for smaller and rural projects. I know we had a push last year in July with the tax reform package that was moving in Congress to try to get some of these changes to be included as part of that. Unfortunately, we came up short on that effort, but we are still pushing. One of the best things we can do is encourage co-sponsors for this bill. So we're always looking for more people to sign on, and that kind of provides that base of support. So that way, when we're looking for some of these future opportunities and legislative vehicles that where some of these improvements might be able to move, we have a good base of support to start from. So encourage you to reach out to your member of Congress and urge them to co-sponsor this bill. It's a bipartisan bill, has strong bipartisan support, and it really makes some fundamental improvements to the program that will see benefits around the country. So, next slide. And then, of course, one of our key issues is the Historic Preservation Fund. This is the primary source of funding for federal historic preservation program. It funds state and tribal preservation officers, as well as several grant programs, including Save America's Treasures Grant Program, African American Civil Rights Grant Program, the Paul Brune Historic Revitalization Subgrant Program, and a lot of these really do obviously it provides the funding needed um, for kind of the federal preservation ecosystem to work, as well as provides direct funding to the preservation projects around the country. Currently, it's a line item in the Department of Interior's budget. So it's something that we need to advocate for every year. I don't know if you're kind of watching some of the national level there, there's some debate of, over um, current appropriations bills. There potentially could be a partial government shutdown. Luckily for us, the Interior appropriations bill was passed earlier this month, so we're set through the end of September, the end of the fiscal year. The funding for that came in at 181.059 million, which is actually a little bit above some of the numbers. It was increased from last year's appropriations, as well as a little bit higher than we even were anticipating. So that was good to see. It still doesn't reflect the need that's out there, and we're still going to be pushing for increases to that program. It's been up to about 204 million at about its highest level. So we're at 181. It's been down. Last year was about 168 million. So it kind of has fluctuated over the last few years. This year we'll be advocating for 250 million for the HPF. We have several anniversaries coming up, and we think this is a great opportunity to be able to lean into that. The 250th anniversary of the United States is this year. We think that provides, what better way than um, protecting than using this opportunity to protect historic places. So we're certainly leaning that. It's also the 50th anniversary of the Historic Preservation Fund, as well as the 50th anniversary of the historic tax credit. So we have several kind of those key anniversaries that we're really trying to lean into, and I think it definitely presents an opportunity for us to try to be able to take advantage of that. Of course, this doesn't come without challenges. We've seen some actions from the administration to kind of hold back funds as they were doing reviews of programs. So sometimes funding was appropriated but not actually coming out. And that's something that we saw last year, where state and tribal historic preservation officers weren't receiving their annual funding and coming out, and it led to several state preservation officers having to lay off staff. I know my home state in Ohio, they had to lay off multiple staff person. They're still kind of recovering from that. Luckily we worked with, we advocated on that, worked with our partners from around the country, key members of Congress who really helped. But we were able to get that funding released, and be able to have. But I know some states are still struggling to kind of get caught back up after that. Next slide. And then that's kind of the funding is one side of it for the Historic Preservation Fund. The other side is kind of reauthorizing the program. So one thing that was included in this year's Interior bill was a 1-year authorization of the HPF, which is great. Very pleased to see that. It had a funding for that had lapsed in previous years. Um, so it's luckily the HPF has had bipartisan support. It's been consistently reauthorized uh, over the years since being established. But lately, we've been working on the kind of these piecemeal approaches of a 1-year authorization. There's been times where you know that wasn't included, and funding had lapsed. Luckily for us, Congress still has been appropriating funds to this program during that time, but it's certainly not the place we want to be. It doesn't exactly provide much certainty for everyone that relies on this funding. And I think we've even seen some efforts of just like, oh, this program's not authorized. Let's go ahead and cancel all the funding for programs that aren't authorized. We certainly don't want to be lumped into that category as well. So it's certainly something that we is one of our top issues. We're seeking a longer term authorization. We are advocating for a bill, the Historic Preservation Fund Reauthorization Act, HR 3418, which would reauthorize the HBF for 10 years, as well as increase that authorized level from 150 million to 250 million. That deals with the annual deposits that are made into the account. And then we talked about funding. Funding was 181 million, so that's precisely why we're advocating for an increase in that because the last several years we've exceeded that funding level, and it's also something that hasn't been updated since the program was established back in the 70s. So it's urgently needed, and that's one of the things that you can also take action on. Encourage a member to co-sponsor that bill. Again, the same kind of thing where the more support we can demonstrate for the bill, the more likely we're able to have that included as part of any kind of moving legislative vehicles that we're able to identify throughout the year. So that'll be one of our key issues. Next slide. And then permitting reform. So I would say one of our key issues every year is protecting the National Historic Preservation Act and the Section 106 review process from any efforts to kind of undermine the law. Little background, Section 106, if you're not familiar, provides a key protection in safeguarding historic properties when carrying out a federal project. It doesn't require any kind of outcome, but at least requires agencies to consider the impact of a proposed project could have on historic resources. Um, so what we're kind of seeing now is Congress is increasingly looking for ways to kind of speed up the permitting process for federal projects. One of the ways that lawmakers have sought to do this, at least sometimes, is by eliminating or reducing these perceived barriers to federal projects, which at times has included the National Historic Preservation Act. I don't know if many of you saw this, but I know the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee held a hearing on the National Historic Preservation Act, which isn't exactly something we see every day. So it certainly caught all of our attention. That was back in the fall, I think October. Um, and I encourage you to check it out if you're interested, and you can watch that hearing online. But I would say largely it went well. The state preservation officer from Utah spoke on that as well as a tribal historic preservation officer, and they were both fantastic. But and while I think the hearing went well, it still demonstrated that there is kind of even bipartisan support for kind of reforming the permitting process and potential changes to the NHPA. So we're not quite sure what that looks like. There's not a concrete proposal out there necessarily, but it is something that we're following. Both houses are pursuing permitting reform. I think the other side of that is one side is going to be potential changes coming up from Congress, but as well as from the uh, administration as well. So that that can include changes with the at the Advisory Council for Historic Preservation, as well as new program comments, things like that, where we could see kind of desires to kind of change that. So that's definitely one of our key issues that we'll be following this year. It'll be one of our asks during uh, lobby day as well this year. But we'll have more to share on that. We're producing one pagers on all of these issues, and we're happy to kind of share those. They'll provide more kind of background and something that you can utilize as part of your advocacy efforts as well. Next slide. One of our easier asks is, I think I mentioned this before, there is the Historic Preservation Caucus. We work closely with them on events throughout the year. It's co-chaired by Representative Mike Turner of Ohio and Representative Leger Fernandez of New Mexico. Bipartisan caucus really kind of brings together members that understand the value of historic places, saving that, the economic impact that those can bring. Um, for Florida, we currently have one member of the caucus from Florida, Representative Darren Soto, from the Ninth District. But it's one of these things, again, membership needs to be renewed every Congress, so it's constantly trying I'm trying to build up support for that. It's definitely one of our easier asks is, if all else fails, you can ask them to join the caucus. And it's really just a way for them to kind of demonstrate their support for preservation, and as well as the caucus does lead several efforts throughout the year with dear colleague letters, our the May briefing, and really kind of help kind of leading, especially as issues come up. We really kind of turn to them to be some of our leaders on these preservation issues. Next slide. Now, one of the talk a little bit about some of the ways that you can get involved. I would say kind of a few things to be thinking about as you're advocating. Do your research. Who are your members of Congress? Perhaps you have a new member of Congress. Take a look at what committees they serve on. Some of the key committees for preservation issues are, the Appropriations Committee, that of course determines funding levels for the Historic Preservation Fund as well as other priorities. The Ways and Means and Finance Committee, this is going to oversee tax policy, so the historic tax credit is going to fall under their purview, as well as the Natural Resources Committee. So that it's going to oversee the National Park Service operations for the Department of Interior. So at a programmatic level, some of the HPF, so the HPF reauthorization, that's going to go through that committee. So those are some of the key committees to kind of be on the lookout for. If some of your members happen to serve on those, certainly would appreciate your help in kind of reaching some of those on these key issues. Otherwise, I encourage you to kind of check out some of their past support. Are they co-sponsoring the historic tax credit bill? Are they a member of the caucus? Also, are they involved in any local preservation efforts that you're aware of? And I'm happy to kind of help be a resource on that if you're curious to kind of learn more about some of the things maybe some of the ways your member has been involved at the national level on preservation issues. But we really encourage you it's part of to have a relationship with these with a member of Congress. Introduce yourself. Um, pro- Try to get their relevant staff person's contact information, and kind of just help be their go-to person on historic preservation issues. Like I said, we think anybody can be an advocate. We want anybody to be an advocate. So this is really kind of about kind of building that relationship, and staying in touch, letting them know that you're one of the experts on these issues. It's also one of these things where staff changes so frequently that it's one of those kind of constant efforts of introducing yourself and being that resource. Next slide. Um, and I'll just kind of say a few things here with, kind of our grassroots advocacy push is we talk to member of Congress all day, but they really want to hear from constituents. They want to hear from people like you. And, members of Congress, for the most part, they're going to be more generalist. They're going to know a little about a lot of different topics, but they're really not going to be the experts. You guys are really the experts on historic preservation. So lawmakers are able to make better decisions when they have better information. And it's really up to the people who are doing that work to be able to provide that information and be able to so to allow them to make better informed decisions on preservation. I think at the base level, that's really how we want advocacy to work. And I'll say, if you're not sharing your views on preservation, who else will? It's kind of it was kind of basic, but this isn't, we're not always the group with the loudest voice on Capitol Hill. So really having kind of that local tie, be able to have to bring in those grassroots voices is really what helps make a difference. I encourage you to use local examples. Help kind of make the connection and connect the dots for them between, how Project X in their district used the historic tax credit, and now it's helping to revitalize this whole neighborhood and creating jobs and doing all these wonderful things. Help help connect the dots between what they're seeing in their district and the federal program that is helping to make that happen. And I would, of course, we want you to all come to DC. We invite everyone to come to Advocacy Week, but you can really advocate from anywhere. Congress is back in district very frequently, so there's a lot of great opportunities to be able to have your voices heard in that way as well. Next slide. Some of the ways you can do that, I think especially since COVID, we've seen a really big bump up of this of holding have a virtual Zoom meeting with congressional staff, or even you're a member of Congress. This one of the benefits is you can kind of bring in more people into that conversation, so you can have the developer, you can have the person on the ground, the business owner, kind of all different sides of who's kind of being impacted by this, and it gives them a good idea of really the constituency that exists for this issue. Next slide. And I would say one of the biggest tools that we have kind of in our advocacy arsenal is the fact that we have these amazing historic sites that are really a powerful tool that can really help to influence lawmakers. There's amazing examples of historic preservation out there and what these federal programs help make possible. So, having them visit a historic tax credit project, or having them visit a project that recently received a historic preservation fund grant, and really being able to demonstrate the impact of the program and the federal investment that's being created as part of that. Just they're able to see that this is creating jobs, creating economic development. It also can help make that personal connection, when they're back in district and they see like, oh, this project is getting received a historic tax credit and all this great things happening. I remember seeing this building when I was a kid, that sort of thing. That's the kind of impact that can come from having these historic site visits. And as I mentioned, they're back in district pretty frequently. August recess is always a great time. They're back in district for the whole month of August. They're looking for things to help kind of fill their schedules. But there's also in district periods throughout the year. So I encourage you to kind of think on that. But that's really one of the best ways to be able to make that impact. Next slide. And of course, Lobby Day. This is like I said, we encourage everyone to come out. It really is a great experience. We talk about the various things you kind of do from anywhere, and these are all great, but there's not quite the same replacement by advocating yourself on the Hill and meeting with lawmakers directly, and that kind of experience that come with that. And they also recognize that folks they put in the effort to come all the way up there from Florida to be able to have their voices heard. So those meetings are always a little bit different, and really much more impactful. We always see a bump up after Lobby Day of the number of co-sponsors on the historic tax credit bill, the number of co-sponsors on the HBF bill, and that kind of impact when you can see that directly is really fantastic. Like I said, we always have a great team from Florida who comes up every year. I'm sure I'm sure they would welcome some folks to join them. So you would have a great group of people to help kind of lead you around, kind of through the hills, through the halls of Congress. And it's really a fun event as well. There's great opportunities. You can meet with lawmakers directly. Actually, go to the next slide here. Just a few more photos from Advocacy Week. But we'll have members of Congress come into the event and speak. Some of our key champions, you can kind of hear from them. It's nice to be able to kind of see that support we have, as well as we host a congressional reception on the Hill every year, is followed by we do a after hours tour of the Capitol, which is always a highlight of the event. So it's like I said, a really enjoyable experience, fun time, and also very impactful. Well, I think it's next slide here. That's most of what I have. I encourage you to, connect with us. There's a QR code. You can scan that and join our legislative update to help kind of keep abreast on national issues that are happening. Follow us on social media, everything like that. But Really appreciate the opportunity to speak, and I'll be around, I think, later for any questions. So thank you.
Thank you, Rob. I appreciate it. Jenny, I'm just going to flow right into ours now, but you can tell me not to do that if you want to, because you're the boss. I apologize
Right
that
on
my
ahead.
winter coat is in the background. It was really cold today, guys. For Tallahassee and Floridians, I know, Rob, you're not going to be impressed by this, but it was cold for us. It was below freezing. So I had to get a lot of layers going on this morning. So,
It was about -4 for us. I'm just going to throw that
no,
out
it
there.
wasn't that cold. But cold's cold at a certain point. Um, what Mark Zubili and I are going to talk about next is, and thank you so much, Rob, for that great national kind of framework. I think that for our folks here in Florida, a lot of times, sometimes we get a little bit siloed about all of the important things that are happening in Florida for our communities and for the state and all of the fights that we have kind of underway here and all the opportunities that we have underway here. And sometimes we need a reminder that we're part of this larger framework as well. So thank you for sharing that with us. And I would say for Mark and I, a lot of the things that Rob said around grassroots advocacy, the things that are kind of key elements there, those are going to be the same for advocating in Florida as well. Building relationships, reaching out when they're not in session, all of those things are great things to do year round in your communities as well. So to get started, I think probably we know who the Florida Trust is, but just in case, we are Florida's statewide nonprofit that works to protect Florida's history and heritage. So we have been around not quite as long as Preservation Action. We were founded in 1978, and we were actually created to save the Florida Historic Capitol. For those of you that have been to Tallahassee, you know that we have this great historic building, and it was almost actually demolished to make way for the new office tower that we have today. And it was this new organization that came together that was really a catalyst for engaging people to make the decision to not demolish. We could have both the old and the new. And I think part of that sort of ethos still exists with us today. So a big part of what we do is advocacy. Mark, do you want to talk through some key facts about the legislative session, sort of what's going on?
Well, it's their legislative session. I mean, it starts in the even year a little earlier. It starts in January as opposed to March, so they're in the middle of a regular session. Basically, it's about the third or fourth week. There's 60-day sessions, so they're expected to end in the middle of March. There are a number of issues. I don't want to say it's overall that it's a cantankerous thing or environment, but each body, the Senate and the House and the governor, are different on or have different places on a number of issues. One of the ones that affect us, or could possibly affect us, is the property tax reform that all of them are talking about. The House is the only one that really is doing any action, or at least hearing bills. But the governor says he wants to have a special session sometime after this regular session. And then he's also said that there might be a special session on reapportionment after the regular session. So to sum up where they are at in this process, they're in the middle of the regular session. A lot of committee meetings are being held on all kinds of different bills. They haven't really gotten to hearing about the budget, and that's why our visit next week will be kind of important and is constantly important to, in particular, our number one issue this year of funding the special categorical grants. Does that kind of sum up where we are, at least in the timeline of things with the state
Yep.
policymakers?
Exactly. Thank you. That's very helpful. So for this legislative session, which Mark mentioned is a relatively brief period of time, here's our five, well, some of these are just sessions, some of these are broader advocacy stuff, but for this year, here are the things that we are focusing on. And I'll just kind of run through these real quick, and then we'll do a little bit of a deeper dive throughout the rest of the conversation. So one thing that we're always working on, and that Mark and I and our advocacy committee and our executive committee are conscious of and work on year round, is continuing to educate policymakers on the economic and community value of historic preservation. And I feel like maybe that is more important now than ever. And I think we've seen that maybe with actions that have happened at the state level and at the national level. But it is important for us that when we go to talk with a lawmaker, their first instinct isn't to believe that historic preservation is an impediment to historic communities. And for those of you who have been doing advocacy for a while, you know that sometimes that is the baseline that you're working with. So we are working overall to paint this picture of preservation as part of economic and community value. So that's one thing we always do. Another thing that we are very passionate about, and probably our number one priority during the session, is seeking full funding for the historic preservation grants. It's actually fiscal year 27. This year is the 2026 session, but it is the historic preservation grants funding. So last year, I'm sure for those of you who follow the preservation grants, you know that we went through the process with the Historical Commission, and then we had two different budgets, one from the House, one from the Senate. One had a good amount of funding for the grants and the other did not. And when everything came out, none of the grants were actually funded. And then there were a few preservation projects that were kind of handpicked that got some grants, but it didn't really follow through the Historical Commission process that has been established. So this year we are exceptionally focused on that. Prior years, there were some good years with grant funding, and we know that those are important funds for preservation in communities throughout Florida. So we're really focused on that. This year also, we heard feedback over the last few years. We worked very hard to create a historic tax credit for the state of Florida that does not currently exist right now. And we had language that we pushed through for 3 years. We had different sponsors. We made really great progress. But we learned that there were some stumbling blocks there. And so over time, the bill language changed to kind of accommodate some of the pain points that lawmakers found. And what we found at the end of the session last year is that we were potentially left with a tax credit bill that didn't meet the needs. It kind of maybe had been Frankenstein's monstered a little bit. So we wanted to take the time this year to really focus on preservation grants, like I said, our number one priority, and to take a step back and to have another clean look at our tax credit bill language, and then also to really work with staff on some of the committees that we had determined were some of the ones that would have to be passed through, that we were getting feedback with some pain points for them. So we are going to refocus on that for this calendar year with the hope of bringing it back for the 2027 session. So I know a lot of you have been following our tax credit journey and wondering where we are with that. That is where we are. And if you are super knowledgeable, and I know some of you on this call are, and would like to help to craft that language or be a part of a team that is working to put together a strategy to get bills passed, we would love to have you. So please put that in the chat, or you can email me directly and we'll get you added to that initiative. Our fourth thing that we're doing during session specifically is monitoring and tracking bills that would impact preservation. So I know that there are some big ones that we are looking at. Senate Bill 208, for instance, is one. And there are others that kind of bubble up throughout the session, both positive and negative. And where we really land here is we really rely on partnerships during session to be effective. So we work very closely with Thousand Friends of Florida, with the Coalition for Florida's Historic Places, the SHPO's office, TIPO's office. We try to work with them to monitor and track bills that are going to be impactful. And then we send weekly advocacy emails with any actions, any call to actions that might need to happen during the session. We also, Zubli and I often testify during committee hearings if it is relevant, and we have said to Thousand Friends of Florida that we are available to help with some of those they're really leading the charge on. So we are a part of that as well. And then finally, I think Rob really said a lot of it, but we also support the federal preservation framework. So we are the coordinator for Advocacy Week in DC, and that it takes a lot of our time as well. So I know we're going to have time for Q&A, so I want to be a little fast as we go through this, but just a tiny little bit of a deeper dive on our preservation stories, our preservation grants. Everybody who is on the call will get a follow-up email that will have the presentations, link to Advocacy Week in DC that Rob mentioned, but we'll pull out those links, one-pagers on funding the preservation grant program, toolkit link. We have a preservation toolkit online tool that has a whole section on advocacy, and it'll talk more about how to be an advocate and how to do grassroots advocacy, and we'll send that link as well. And then we're also going to send a link to this year's Florida Preservation Stories. And that document is a book. I actually have it here so you can see that has a page for each of the grants that are on the preservation grants list. So this is really relied on very heavily when we do our in-person visits, which we are doing next week. And we mark in the book any grant that would be in a particular legislator's district. So then when we go to talk to them, kind of Rob, to your point about customizing and making them care about what we're talking about, we would have a little tag there and say, if these grants are funded, these wonderful things will happen in your district. So it's a tool that we use to talk about that. I already hit a little bit that those were not funded last year, so we're really focusing on that. Next week is our preservation legislative visits and reception. So those of you who can join us, obviously, we'd love to have you. Mark, do you want to talk a little bit about how the day goes and the reception and who comes and all those kind of things?
The day is usually, in the years past, we have focused on mostly budget committees and others. In particular, on the tax credit, we were, trying to push on to meeting folks on those committees. This year, we're putting together our agenda for Tuesday. It'll be filled with mostly members that are on the policy committee and the appropriations committee that oversees Department of State and oversees the funding of these grants. And the idea will be, we have probably at least a couple groups that will have scheduled times to go in, meet the lawmaker, whether it's theirs or someone on the committee, and point out to them what projects are in their district, and that last year they left their district with zero by not funding them. And then in the evening, at the same time we invite friends and all in the process to come by and attend our legislative reception at the House. And a lot of them know the House, don't usually get a chance to come by. They know it from, when they're spending their time during the session, and it's a very notable House. So a lot of them will come by to try and spec out the House the one time that we do have a reception like that.
And Zubali and I actually have already been once, well, more than one times, but we went one time on the first day of session, and we went to every legislator's office and gave them a little packet that included the grants, included a letter from the Florida Trust about the value of the grants, included an invitation to the reception. So we have been working on the front end to kind of do everything we can to make sure that is front of mind for them. To Mark's point, we'd love for everyone to join us if they can. If you want to put in the chat, or you can just email us if you're able to come. And I'm just looking through the chat now to see if there's anything I need to point out. Here are some ways that we can encourage you to get involved, and you'll see all of these in the follow-up email that we get as well. But signing up for the advocacy emails is really important. Signing up for Rob's congressional updates is really important. Anything you can do to be building relationships with your lawmakers year-round, not just during session, is always really helpful. And of course, joining the Florida Trust helps to enable us to do all of the advocacy work we do at the local and state level. Just a quick blurb about our preservation toolkit. I already mentioned it, but it is a great online resource that you'll get the link to that does a deep dive into preservation advocacy, among other things. We also do Historic Preservation 101, Historic Preservation for Historic Homeowners, a lot of different areas where you might want some guidance or information. We have this resource available for you. And then finally, something that you could do to help is share your stories. You could share them here through the chat. There's also a link, and that'll be in the follow-up as well. But sharing your stories, the value of historic preservation. Oftentimes we get people sharing federal grants they may receive in their community and how that's made a difference. Maybe sharing how a grant in your community from DHR has made a difference. Anything you can do to share your stories, even if you can't go to DC or Tallahassee, they really help. So we advocate and ask for you to do that. And with that, Jenny, that's the end of our session. I have contact slides that I'll scroll through if anybody wants to make note of those, but they will be in the follow-up as well. So don't feel like you have to feverishly write this down. And then I'll hand it over back to you for questions.
Great. Well, this has been a lot of information, and I think you really divided it, each of you divided it into some really digestible topics. And we've had a lot of good questions coming in and concerns. So I appreciate all of you participating with us and sticking with us. We're going to try to discuss some of your questions, but I realize in about 8 minutes, we are probably not going to get to all of them. So one thing that I do want to go back and emphasize, Melissa, because I think some folks do have a lot of questions and concerns about local advocacy issues, getting education on how to use the federal tax credit to their advantage, and things that they could be doing at the local level. And so I just want to encourage folks to reach out to Melissa, to us generally, because that preservation toolkit, we are taking it on the road. And we're trying to build a model where we can put that out there as a service and come to your community to do an individual one-on-one session. And we can tailor that to specifically your needs and concerns. So I just want to put a plug back in there for that. We are going to be doing our first preservation toolkit workshop at the end of our Preserve Florida conference in St. Petersburg this year. If you want to travel to that, it's going to be the Saturday after the conference, which I think is the 16th, May 14th through 15th. And then on the 16th is a Saturday. So you'll be getting some information about that. Enough for me. Let's get to some questions. We had one early on trying to understand the relationship, Rob, between preservation advocacy and the National Trust for Historic Preservation. Do you want to clarify what that relationship or connection is?
Sure, yeah, absolutely. So yeah, we work closely with the National Trust for Historic Preservation and especially they have government relations team. We work closely with their staff. We're meeting with them probably on a bi-weekly basis. So yeah, we are a different organization, but we work closely with a lot of our kind of national partners, so including the National Trust as well as the National Conference of SHPOs, but also organizations like the American Cultural Resources Association, ACRA, as well as some other national organizations that all kind of, like I said, preservation can be sometimes be small enough as it is. So we're always trying to work together to be able to strengthen and make us bigger and better and more effective than we would be on our own. So we're closely with them.
Excellent. And if somebody wants to really try to advocate for the tax credit or for additional, full funding, what I know we kind of hinted at the best, some suggestions, but what do you think the best thing to do is if we're sitting in our home in our community? How can we really advocate to increase funding? Rob, the national level.
Oh, at the national level, sure.
Sorry. Yes.
No, that's okay. I would say, obviously, we have just like I think most people have. We have those letters, and you can send this letter and email your representative about in support of 250 million for the historic preservation fund or support of the historic tax credit bills. And by all means, I mean we do that. That's still incredibly helpful, and being able to kind of share some of those, be able to spread the word, and that way. But I would say kind of the biggest thing is kind of just that relationship building and trying to kind of establish that relationship with your congressional office and be able to kind of be and once you have that kind of established and we're like, hey, there's this preservation issue that's coming up. I'm curious what you guys think on this, like that kind of thing. So, like be able to establish and you can share, some of those like, hey, here's we noticed this bill's been introduced. We would love for you to be a co-sponsor on it, like that kind of thing. To be able to, when you have that relationship, that's the kind of thing that can kind of take it to the next level.
Excellent. And I'm going to toss it over to Melissa and Mark because several of our questions had to do with who to contact, who are the people. Someone was asking about heroes and villains in our legislature, but I know we all try to think of them as friends. But who are those that are higher on the list in terms of helping us improve funding for Florida's grant programs? Is there a certain committee or a certain resource that people should be looking toward?
Yeah, Mark, why don't you share maybe the strategy of how we've been prioritizing the meetings? Because I think that's a good
Well, it
reflection.
was like I said before. I mean, on this grant, the grant funding, we're targeting the Senate and House General Government membership appropriations committees, the membership of those, and then the committees that oversee a lot of the policy form. Just to point out that oversee the Department of State and policy. Just to point out to them, that there was this. That no matter what happened, somehow they zeroed and didn't fund anything except for special little ones they handpicked that were due to certain folks that had favor in it. Overall, with historic preservation this year, it has been or where we're at in it, we were on the offensive for some point on the tax credit here in Florida. But with the president that's come in, there was and the uncertainty of Congress, that funding was a little uneasy on the national level. And like you said earlier, Melissa, it got to be after 3 years that it kind of got picked with, so, well, we need to have this and we need to have that it really was kind of a mess. So we retooled. And at the same time, two things have popped up. These grant funding, which has been a pretty consistent thing. They've always followed a process where the Historic Commission, rated them, and the legislature, whatever, they did have their discretion, would try and fund and would put an allotment towards it that would fund as many of the projects as possible. At the same time, getting to the heroes and villains, the trust has become pretty active or engaged with a number of folks that are stakeholders, like-minded around the state. And all this information can be found on our website or on the trust website as kind of an information clearinghouse of different attacks and things you could say on historic preservation, whether it be, and I scrolled earlier and saw some of my friends from down in Miami, whether it's, things that generate down there that make a carte blanche demolition that affects the whole state, that, goes from, something that's a little issue in one part of the state that, in the name of, we need to, in growth and development. And it's really important to be on the lookout for them. They're becoming more and more frequent, it seems, every session, because as growth occurs in our state, they don't want impediments and tear down old buildings without really giving them much thought. So we're kind of on the defense where we were on the offense several years ago in historic preservation. I kind of felt with trying to get a state tax credit here in Florida, but now we're really just trying to get back to our basics on the funding of the grants, and then try and make sure that we don't get, that nothing really bad. Like, I think everyone on the call is probably somewhat familiar with the Senate Bill 280 from last year that gave a wide swath of wherever these hurricanes have come that, no regulation, we got to build, we got to rebuild, we got to, grow back and rebuild. Well, that obviously affects historic preservation and a number of other things. We're watching those to make sure that they still do keep out for those, and that as they fix these type of things. That is everything I can think of in a nutshell of where we're at in preservation in the state.
I appreciate that. And while we're talking about individuals, I do want to give a special shout out to Thousand Friends of Florida. We do listen to them and read what they are concerned about when it comes to historic preservation, and it's very much a conversation between both of us. So I know someone asked what other organizations we may work with, and I know Thousand Friends is one of them we stay in touch with. Someone asked about League of Women Voters. So we definitely seek out as many partnerships as possible, and I think that this time that we're not really aiming for, the Florida state tax credit, I think it's a good coalition building time for us to keep doing that work. So I want to thank our friends in those organizations. We are coming down on time. And I think we do have some other questions going out there, but we will do a follow-up email and see if we can answer any of those. But in respect for everyone's lunch hour, I do want to thank you again for joining us on this Lunch and Learn. We do look for sponsorships. So if your company is interested in sponsoring a future Lunch and Learn, please email Laura Glenn at the Florida Trust, and her contact information will be shared in the chat. And if you're not already a member of the Florida Trust, please consider joining to keep access to these webinars and keep getting emails from us to let you know what's going on, as well as information about our relaunched Preservation Passport program. So we hope you'll join us in February for our next Lunch and Learn session, where we're going to discuss the 11 to Save program and the Preservation Awards program and the nomination process. This will occur on Friday, February 27th at 11:30 Eastern. So if you have not registered or seen that yet, we're also going to put that link, registration link, in the chat for you to go ahead and sign up. As we mentioned, you're all going to receive a follow-up email about today's presentation with the links, as well as maybe some additional information that we can provide and sources. And so please be looking for that material in the coming few days. Thank you all again for joining us. It was a great discussion. Thank you to our panelists, to Rob, to Mark, and to Melissa for sharing your information, and for all of you who gave us some great discussion questions. Everyone, take care.
Oh, no.